Hello and welcome to the stream. So it's a really exciting time to have this conversation. We're going to be talking about the Green Party today. They've just hit 150,000 members and exceeded it, which means that they've doubled their membership in the time that Zach Polanski has been leader, and they've trebled their membership in the last 18 months. And I just watched Navarra earlier today, and they were saying that the Green Party at their conference passed a motion to try and get the membership to 150,000 by 2030. And within weeks of that conference, it's already happened. So that's where we are in terms of the membership. And you'll have seen on Twitter that there was a poll today that put the Green Party just 1 percentage point behind Labour. And that poll, that YouGov poll, is the worst poll that Labour have ever had in YouGov's history, and is the best poll the Green Party have ever had. So it's clear now, look, that might have been a rogue poll, but even the polling average is showing that the Green Party are on the up. They've gone from around about 8 to 9% in the polls, and they're now at 12 to 13% if you look at the polling average. So this is clearly a time where people are enthusiastic about the Green Party. And I'm joined today by Joe Skeeping. Now, Joe Skeeping is chair of the Brighton and Hove Green Party. And I'm going to be talking to him today about what he makes of this surge in support under the leadership of Zach Polanski, how sustainable it is, how the Green Party might be able to move beyond their bases in cities like Brighton and Hove. But let's introduce Joe Skeeping. Hi, Joe.
Hello.
He's on his phone, just fallen over.
Just managed to play with as we James. Hello. I'd like to make it exciting. Hello. I'm the chair in the local party. I've literally just come out of a members meeting. We would normally have maybe 10 or 15 people. We had 50 people there. It ran over quite considerably as a result. Yeah, it's everything you were just saying, James. It's a really, really exciting moment for the Green Party. It's quite scary in a way. To be a chair of a local party at the moment is quite daunting, because you literally got
being chair of the Brighton party. I guess your membership has grown massively, has it?
Yeah, obviously this is a place where people already know that the Greens are a serious political threat, but also there are lots of people still watching. That it's easy to imagine that the Green Party in Brighton and Hove is very, very active. It's pretty active, but there is still a lot of space for it to grow, and we're really seeing that at the moment. As I say, literally hundreds of people joining every week.
So obviously we've had this massive surge under Polanski, and goodness knows it might continue. It's even possible the Green Party might become the only credible sort of alternative to reform. Who knows where the polls are heading? What do you put it down to?
I'm just trying that out. Sorry, James. What do I put it down to? I think with Zach, you've got someone who is willing to be bold and decisive in what he says. So Zach is not afflicted by the kind of condition that we see with so many of our politicians, which is to always be trying to anticipate what he wants, what people are listening want him to say, or rather will strike people as feeling kind of sufficiently safe, right? Sufficiently within a set of pre-established guardrails. But I think the thing that people love about Zach as a leader is that, and I heard this multiple times this evening, is that he is willing to try and tug the kind of Overton window of politics back towards the left. So he's not waiting around for the respectable opinion to decide that it's okay to have certain left-wing positions. He's willing to sort of actively try and grab it and pull it in his direction. And so I think that's very exciting. And then I guess the other side of it is I haven't mentioned yet, but the huge disenchantment with Labour, which, in a way for me, as someone who, I lost faith in the Starmer project very, very early on, as you know. And so I was never I had very few kind of illusions to lose. But, quite understandably, lots of people who were sick of the Conservatives for years and years did have hopes that this Labour government, it might not be, the most radical government that's ever existed, but it would offer them things. It would, in some respects, improve their living conditions, make things a little bit more manageable. And the sense of disenchantment with that failure, and obviously around the kind of question of genocide in Gaza as well, is just so palpable So people have got the sort of twin thing of, like, on the one hand, this deep disenchantment, on the other hand, the hope that has been offered with bolder leadership in the Green Party. We always had a radical policy platform. We've got the bold kind of leadership and messaging to go with it. And then I think obviously people were also watching to see what happened with your party. And, we still don't know actually what will come out of that process. And there may be something interesting at the end. But as someone who's been involved in trying to set up a new party from scratch, it's extremely difficult and there are lots of pitfalls. And obviously, I think to some extent, in a self-inflicted way, your party has sort of walked into some of those. Whereas in the Green Party, we've got something that already exists. People don't have to reinvent the whole thing from scratch. And so the sense of just being able to pile into something and get going straight away is, people are not in the mood to wait around at the moment. They see the threat that is posed by the Reform Party, and they want to be in something that is actively resisting and pushing back now.
So that kind of raises a question, though, doesn't it? Right? There's going to be people who are watching this channel. I've got quite a diverse audience, as you'll see from my comments. There's going to be people potentially watching this video who are thinking about voting Reform at the next election. The first thing Zach Polanski did when he became leader was to go to Clacton and to talk to Reform voters. What is the Green Party's message for Reform voters? How are you going to persuade people who might be thinking of voting Reform at the next election to actually think about the Green Party?
Well, I think, this has been well articulated by Zach already, that the message to Reform voters is, to some extent, like, you're right to be pissed off and to feel disenchanted, to feel that the system is rigged against you, and that the system, economic system, political system, just cannot be allowed to continue on its current trajectory, and that therefore something radical, some alternative force is needed. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean we would agree with sort of everything that Reform is offering, or necessarily everything that Reform voters would be fearful of. And I'm thinking here, obviously, particularly around migration. The Green Party has a different view. I think sometimes it's kind of lazily mischaracterized in the media or whatever as kind of like some kind of open borders, stance. It's more complicated than that, but it's definitely about having a more humane kind of view of people who are traveling to the UK as asylum seekers and refugees. But I think my view is, you can't, no party is seeking to say to voters, we've got everything you want. There might be people watching this stream who have particular views on migration who would probably disagree with me, but they might still agree with me about the idea that, millionaires and billionaires have gouged huge amounts of wealth over the past 30 or 40 years, and that their lives are harder as a result. And I don't think Reform are going to do anything about that. I think they might sort of make noises about it, but in practice, they absolutely represent those interests. And so if you want a party that's going to take those vested interests on in the economic system, then the Green Party is the party for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just doing a video about Reform, actually, which will be out in the next week or so, I hope. And it's clear from doing that video that Farage was motivated to get into politics by actually seeing Keith Joseph speak at his school when he was at that posh private school he went to. He really admired, the Thatcherites, particularly the Rivers of Blood guy, whose name is escaping me presently.
Enoch Powell. Enoch Powell.
And he's never really got away from that view. He's always really been a Thatcherite at heart, I think. Farage. Okay. So thinking
Truss's budget, right?
Huh?
When Liz Truss's budget dropped, Farage was one of the various people who said how great it was. Proper conservative budget. These people, they're all just memory holding.
Yeah, and if you look at their last, they've got a contract on the website. People can still read it. It hasn't come down yet. They're saying they're going to cut 50 billion. And he was in an interview the other day where he said, actually, we want to go beyond that. So any Reform government you elect is going to be doing cuts. But let me continue to put questions to you rather than getting distracted by my own thoughts. Well, let's think about who the Greens are appealing to. So I'm just going to show you this poll here. So it's quite interesting. The Green Party are actually in first place amongst those aged 18 to 49, at least according to this recent YouGov poll. And they're certainly doing the best amongst the youngest demographic. Amongst the youngest demographic in this poll, they actually were on 40%, which was double what Labour were on. So clearly, the Green Party are doing well amongst younger voters. But I guess the flip side of that is, how are they going to appeal to the older voters, because they're not doing very well at all amongst over 50s?
Yeah. Well, I think, part of the challenge here is we're talking about economic interests, aren't we? So it's quite hard, as a Green Party, we represent a certain set of economic interests, I would argue, right? We represent the interests of people who are disproportionately likely to be renters, who are disproportionately likely to be in the gig economy, or to be in work that is not necessarily fixed and certain. I'm trying to think of the exact phrase, but it's gone out of my head. Those people, in other words, the kind of economic interest, the coalition that we represent, is disproportionately likely to be younger. So to some extent, with older voters, I think, we are partly kind of asking those older voters to think, this is are you happy about the conditions that your son, your children, your grandchildren are facing in terms of the cuts to further education, the cuts to higher education, the unaffordability of rent, the impossibility of buying a house, the job market, etc., etc. And then I think, obviously, we want to make sure that old people are kind of treated with dignity and respect. And I think the whole economic system that we live under is one that kind of immiserates everybody in various ways. And I think, that also applies to older people who are facing
I've just lost your sound for a second there, Joe. So I'm just gonna take you off the camera for a second whilst you sort that out. I was listening to Gary Stevenson the other day, and he was talking about an inheritocracy. That part of the problem for young people is that it used to be the case that if you went back in time, you could make enough money to get yourself on the housing ladder by working, whereas these days you have to inherit wealth. And part of kind of what we need to do is to fix that. But of course, the difficulty is that the older generation worked hard, and it was by working hard that they managed to, buy their own homes, get themselves secure, get their good pensions, and put themselves in a position now where they're comfortable. And so I think they kind of expect young people to do the same, but of course they haven't quite appreciated that the economic situation for young people is rather different from the one that they've inherited. But I guess maybe there needs to be a message from the Green Party to say to older voters, there is this connection between the generations. You want your children to do well, and actually that's going to demand, it's going to demand that things change, and it can't go on the same way. So it's perhaps quite a difficult message to get across. But I do think they need to have a go at it. I'm going to try and come back to you, Joe. Hopefully the sound is working now.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's okay. You just dropped out for me, at least.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Look, I think, to me, part of the message is that in the end, capitalism as an economic system is something that, fundamentally makes people precarious, right? So, older people who are forced to sell their home to cover the cost of care or whatever, there are various ways in which our system robs older people of dignity, and that obviously includes an underfunded NHS, for example. So I don't think it's the right, it's not true to say that we're only appealing to sort of like, older people to say, well, think about younger relatives. I think that's part of it, but I don't think that's the only aspect of it. And then on that sort of wider kind of issue of like the inheritocracy, I think it's a really lovely little phrase. And to me, it also encapsulates this idea that I've been thinking about a lot, that like, I just think that so much of our politics is explained by the idea that if you sort of matured politically, sort of from about the mid 1980s through to about the mid 2010s, you really learned a kind of story about politics, right? Which is that politics is won in the centre ground, that you need a certain type of leader and you need a certain type of programme and so on to be able to win. And that was compelling because it seemed to be true. People did win with the same kind of people were winning elections year after year. And also, I always think about there's a certain, I don't think this applies to all sort of older people, but there's certainly a kind of generation of like the professional managerial class who just kept winning elections, in the sense that they voted for Thatcher, then they voted for Blair, then they voted for Cameron. And so for them, the whole experience of like 30, 40 years of politics was just that politics just moved to wherever they were at any given point. And so those people are quite hard to reach, really, because they just can't understand what's happening, because they've benefited financially from the whole kind of, the sort of unleashing of capital in the way that took place under Thatcher, which had short-term gains for certain people. I think it's had hugely damaging long-term consequences. But they just look around and they're baffled by what they see, right? The turn towards reform, but previous to that, Brexit or Corbyn, or now with Zach Polanski. So that, I think those are the hardest people to try and sort of win over, really. But I do think, that there are also older people for whom life is a real struggle and for whom the Green Party also has solutions to offer.
There was a nice example of this today, actually. So I'm going to show you a video clip you've probably seen on social media. This is Harriet Harman. I don't know if you saw this today.
Oh, Harriet I haven't.
Here we go. Enjoy. So this is Harriet Harman getting really annoyed by Zach Polanski.
I like a clip.
He's a combination of Jeremy Corbyn and Nigel Farage, and neither appeals to me. Elections are a competition, and you do have to worry. And there's been a lot of focus on Zach Polanski as their new, supposedly dynamic, charismatic leader. Now, for me, the Greens have always seemed like a very sort of collaborative, women's focused, teamly kind of party. And Zach Polanski is not in that vibe at all. He's in the kind of big I am, male leader vibe.
The point is that he, a bit like Farage to the right, he's capturing a bit of a zeitgeist. He's capturing disillusionment with the Labour Party. He's capturing young people's vibe, right? So Labour should be worried, right, Ruth?
He's a really good communicator. He's capturing the idea for people that voted Labour, but maybe perhaps feel a bit disillusioned by them, that there is another option out there, that they can be true to their progressive lefty principles and they don't have to vote for the kind of chaos that is the Corbyn Your Party. There is something else. There's a place for them to go. They can go somewhere.
He's a combination. For me, it seems like he's a combination of Jeremy Corbyn and Nigel Farage, and neither appeals to me.
I get that you're not getting the feels for Zach Polanski, Harriet, but I have to say, and I'm going to say this with respect, although I know it's going to sound disrespectful, I don't mean it to, so please don't shoot the messenger, but I don't think you're their target voter. I think they're looking much further down the age demographic, and they're looking at an electorate that isn't steeped in two-party politics anymore, that's far more transactional, that wants to use their ballot to make a particular point.
Yeah, so
I've just got several thoughts in my head straight away. First of all, props to Ruth Davidson. Don't have to love the old Scottish Tory leader, but just like so interesting that a Tory actually is just able to have that sort of slightly more detached, like, oh yeah, like I can see what Zach Polanski's doing. Like it kind of makes sense, right? And then Harriet Harman just radiates that classic centrist Labour vibe, which is like, manager, excuse me, manager, this isn't allowed. This is the wrong type of politics. We've already dealt with this. We had this in 1983. We had this in 2019. This is not allowed anymore. And it's like they just have not understood that the way that politics has changed is far more seismic. They thought it was done. They thought once they beat Corbyn, that was it. And then they could do whatever they wanted. They could run the Labour Party however they wanted as their own private fiefdom. And there's this outrage and like genuine sense of like contempt. That whole thing of like, oh, the Greens used to be so nice. They used to be so nice. And what of course she means is they weren't a threat. That's all she means. Like, you're not allowed, like it is just literally like, don't you know who I am? But in a kind of party political sense. And she, they're talking there about the Greens winning over younger voters. People have not internalized this yet. The last YouGov poll that put us on 16%, we're the most popular party according to that poll for under 50s, 50. In other words, the millennials, younger Gen X voters, right? It's not just the oldest, the youngest people in the electorate who are being drawn towards the Greens. Because that whole thing, what did New Labour deliver for? It delivered for that boomer generation with those ongoing house price rises. The generation below that who are priced out, they have no kind of attachment to the Labour Party. And you and I, James, obviously know each other outside of this podcast. We've been saying for years now, those Labour polls are just going to keep on falling. There's nothing holding them up. And you're just seeing that at the moment.
So let's say I've got two more questions, John. I'll let you go because I know you're busy this evening with all of the new members that you've got in
very exciting.
Brighton Hove. Joe was at a new members meeting and he's only just managed to take a break, which is why he's nodding to people in the background. So I'm really thankful for him for being here. Just thinking about the party locally, then you've obviously, it must be a lot of pressure, right? Because you are in charge there with your committee, which I sit on actually. For the whole of the Brighton area, the first place where the Green Party ever elected an MP in Brighton Pavilion, and you reckon that you might have a chance in 2 other seats there, is that right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say reckon. We absolutely think those 2 seats are just winnable seats, like Kemptown and Peacehaven, which is obviously the east of Brighton Hove. We won 20% of the vote in the last election without doing any campaigning. Just grab these. No, of course not at all. You're all good. We won 20% without doing any campaigning at all. We look at someone like Chris Ward, who's the MP there, who's got really no sort of support base in the local party because he was imposed by the Labour Central Party without a vote. And then in Hove, someone like Peter Kyle, who was deeply entrenched in the kind of centrist politics of the Labour Party. So it's all very winnable. I mean, in terms of like whether I feel pressure, I mean, the role of the chair, I'm not there to tell people what to do. I'm just there to sort of help coordinate and organize. So it's ultimately down to the members to decide what kind of party we want. And, I see it as ultimately it's going to be a matter of how far people are galvanized by that message that the Greens are offering and want to get involved. That will set the kind of limits of what we can achieve in the city.
And it leads into a question that's often asked of the Green Party that Brighton and Hove is quite a specifically sort of, how would you describe it? Quite a lefty liberal city, or at least that's how it's perceived. And of course, the Green Party have done well there and might pick up seats there. It might pick up seats in places like Bristol. But is its appeal confined? I know we've got these 2 rural seats, but it kind of exposes a tension, right? And one of the criticisms of Zach during the leadership contest was that he's kind of resolving that tension by tilting in favour of the sort of urban seats and away from the rural seats. Do you think that the Green Party can continue to appeal more broadly, or is there an issue there?
No, I think we can. I think it's a challenge, right? Because look, the simple reality of politics is that, what do people say? That politics abhors a vacuum. So in other words, there's space. The Labour Party have left all of this space with this kind of extremely hubristic kind of charge to what they saw as the centre ground, where actually very, relatively few people are actually to be found, to their surprise, right? What they would have said, the old school Blairite centre ground. So then there's just loads of space to the left. And obviously there was the attempt to fill it with your party, which, remains a sort of, a question mark. So, naturally, with the kind of policy perspectives that the Green Party have, which was already really left wing. It wasn't like we just suddenly became a left wing party. You know, those people who elected Green MPs in North Herefordshire and in Norfolk and Suffolk, and a Green Council over there as well, they didn't kind of they weren't electing sort of like conservatives on bicycles, whatever people say. You know, this is a party that has stood for years on things like, you know, legalization of drugs, of kind of like really, really progressive taxation policies. You know, so none of that is new. So I think, you know, you can make these things appealing to a rural audience by talking about, you know, again, the kind of, by making sure that we're talking still about the environment, and we're talking about, you know, actually talking about how we preserve nature and pass it on to our children. Those things still matter. You know, the way in which we're talking about, you know, things like the rivers and so on, but also things like bus services and GP services. So you know, there are ways in which these things can resonate. I'm not pretending that there isn't a tension there, because I think it's, you know, it's widely understood that there is, and I think it is, you know, at the moment, I think it is most likely that we're going to be putting more focus on winning those urban constituencies, because after all, that's where we've got, you know, lots and lots of second places already, including, for example, in Hove and Portslade. But I think I agree also with those who have said that it's important that the Greens don't lose entirely that message that resonates beyond just urban areas. I mean, just as a case in point, in Brighton and Hove, obviously we're part of Sussex, so we're going to be electing a mayor of Sussex and Brighton. Sussex and Brighton in May 2026. We've got a candidate who is the deputy leader of the Green Party, Rachel Millward, who's currently the co-chair of the council over in Wealdon. So, you know, again, very, very rural part of Sussex. So we're going, you know, we're having to think now with other Green parties across Sussex about how we create a campaign. We've got a great candidate, but we've also got to create a campaign that's going to resonate in Brighton, in Crawley, in Worthing, in Hastings, in Wealdon, you know. So that's going to be challenging, but you know, in sort of 5-party politics, which is what we're in now, there, of course, it also means we've got a great opportunity to win.
Fantastic. So I've got one question myself, one final question myself. I've got 2 in the chat, which I might quickly ask you.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah,
questions.
Yep.
So if somebody's watching this and they're thinking of joining the Green Party, what would you say to them?
Well, do it, obviously, because the growth at the moment is extraordinary, and you just get in it. It's sort of like it's happening now. You know, I don't know. Do you want to wait around till we get to 250,000 and then go, oh, I'll join? You know, like, I don't know. For me, I would want to be part of something that is growing at this pace, because if you come in now, you've obviously got the opportunity to shape it. Like, the party is being transformed by this influx of members. I say that in a positive sense. You know, I was at, you know, we had a Green Party members meeting in Brighton Hove. We had 120 people in a room that sat 80. You know, that sense of like palpable excitement and kind of urgency and importance. You know, what's your, I guess I would say to people, if you're opposed to the politics of reform, what's your other vehicle for pushing back against reform? If you want to see a more progressive government, do you really think Labour is going to do that unless they've got pressure to their left?
Well, I guess somebody might come back and say something similar to what I said to you many months ago, and I think this point of view is weakening. But we live in Brighton and Hove. The Green Party are obviously the right party to join for somebody on the left in Brighton and Hove. Yeah. That's why I've joined the Green Party, right? That is pretty much the only reason. I'm a socialist. I'm on the left. I'm motivated by getting rid of some of the MPs, particularly Chris Ward in Kemp Town, who was parachuted in and replaced a good left-wing Labour MP in the constituency. But what if you live somewhere else? What if when your party eventually, there's lots of what ifs in this question. What if when your party eventually get going, it happens to be that vehicle? You know, aren't the Green Party supposed to be cooperating with your party?
Yeah, I mean, you know, your party has to get to the point where it's kind of constituted before we can have conversations about how we work with it. And it's got humps in the road to get over, which are also to do with sort of like, you know, the internal political tensions, as well as strategic issues. So my view on your party is I'm just waiting. I'm almost like some of these people who are still, I'm still watching and waiting, and let's see. And if they get to the point where they're ready to really contest, then of course we're going to talk to them and have a constructive relationship. Zach has made that really clear. So I don't think, to me, there's no onus on the Green Party there. We're just going to get going and do stuff. And then what was the other part? Oh yeah, like thinking beyond Brighton Hove. Yeah, I just think, look, I know it's kind of a cliche or whatever, but like the idea that we say, this is the constraint of what the Green Party can become. It's not that long ago that the party was getting 4 or 5% in the polls, and it's now, maybe at the top end, but 16, 17%. These are increasingly not outlier polls. With 15, 16, 17% now we've seen in 3 different polls. So it seems to me that there's no sense in which that is necessarily the lid, the ceiling of where the Greens can get to, or that Labour has hit the floor on 17%. And I think it's totally plausible that we overturn it completely. So at that point, suddenly a whole load of seats. So I think, if you're in London,
then it starts to look very different, doesn't it? Right? Because as I say in a recent video, the Labour Party's whole argument, at least under Keir Starmer, at the next election is going to be it's either Labour or it's reform. But that argument only works if the Labour Party can hang on to their spot in second place. As soon as they lose that, the Green Party can say, well, it's either us or reform in lots of seats. And actually, it's the Labour Party they're getting in the way. And actually, that starts to happen very quickly if the Green Party take over. So I think we're in a very dynamic period in our politics where it's like, somebody put it again on Navarra Media, somebody said, it's like the hardware is first past the post, but the software has changed and it no longer works with the operating system. And I feel like that's exactly what our politics feels like. First past the post is desperately trying to create two-party politics, but it's just not what people feel. And what it made me think is, because I was obviously expecting to speak to you this evening, is, well, what if we had PR? What on earth would the Greens poll numbers look like if instead of them trying to operate within a system where people understand that they can't vote Green necessarily in some constituencies, people were just liberated and could vote Green however they wanted to, wherever they lived?
Well, they'd already be ahead.
Numbers then.
We'd already be ahead of Labour. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, Labour definitely, the whole bet really is that they can just pivot back to the message of it's us or reform. And I just because I think it's interesting. I mean, they tried it. We're obviously we had a by-election in Queen's Park, which is a ward within Brighton City Council. This is a Labour-held ward. They had a majority of about 500 votes, about 15, 20%. And there was a by-election that took place sort of over the autumn, just before really the main surge in members. We had huge grassroots turnout of our existing membership. And basically what we did very early in that campaign was just flood it with green posters. We had loads of activists. We had posters up all over Queen's Park. So then Labour were going around saying, oh, it's us against reform. And people on the doorstep were like, well, I don't think it is. Because they could look around at their streets and be like, no, I think the Greens are here. And the thing about the Greens is they do have this strong grassroots presence. So I think, if we can mobilise our activist base, then I think we can really give the lie to that claim. And I feel like the local elections in London, particularly for us, but other metropolitan areas as well, in 2026 in May, are going to be such a groundbreaking moment. And I think that's where you could really see it shift. And that it's worth thinking like we haven't seen. It's possible that we haven't yet seen the big green surge, and it's also totally plausible that, like, I don't know, you might have constituents, you might have local parties selecting constituency candidates in a sort of year or so with a membership that half of that membership are still not in the party yet. They're still going to join between now and
Is it not also possible that this is a Change UK moment? What makes you?
No.
I mean, look, I don't think that. But
sorry, when did Change UK get 150,000 members?
They were never a mass movement, but they
no,
did.
and that is the difference.
They did lead in the polls in the middle.
Yeah. Anything can happen in politics, right? I'm not deluded about that. I don't think that there's anything divine or whatever preordained about the rise of the Greens. And sure, it can fall back. But at the moment, it's like if your party continuing to struggle in terms of organisation and getting set up, and if Labour continue to stay where they are, we're in that space, and there's nothing else there, and there's loads and loads of voters here, loads and loads and loads of voters, and that was always misunderstood by the big-brained, sensible columnists who praised Keir Starmer for his genius strategy before 2024 and said that this is going to bury the left and whatever. These people just could not see the reality, which is there's just no enthusiasm for the kind of centrist project that Starmer represents. So nothing is preordained, but I feel like I'm very glad we're in the position that we're in. And sure, it can collapse, things can fall back or whatever, but there's also no reason why they can't just continue to grow. There's no reason to assume we're at the ceiling.
And this adds to the argument for joining the party, right? Because we see it with Zoran Mandani in New York, that loads and loads of money is being thrown at defeating him. It's going to be the same here. The Green Party, despite having a large membership, which is obviously going to bring in money, because of how the public funding for political parties works, they're very poor because it's determined by how many MPs you've got and how many members of the House of Lords. So the big parties have got just way more money than the Green Party, and when you add to that, of course, that Reform, Labour and the Tories are getting money from big money donors. The Reform UK, just from Richard Tice alone, their deputy leader, they get £1 million. So these are parties backing the status quo and therefore backing, big money interests. They're going to get a lot of money, and that's why the Green Party needs to build this sort of people-powered campaign. I'm just going to bring in two questions from the chat.
I've got 5 minutes, Mr. Armstrong.
We'll do it very quickly. Okay, so first question from the chat is, what's the Greens' plan for housing?
Well, I don't know if you saw the motion that was passed in conference quite recently. It's got quite a catchy title, so abolish landlords. Now, that's not quite a policy of sort of Maoist removal of landlords. Obviously, it's a policy that is designed to make the sort of position of the private landlord for private rent, and particularly the sort of like the landlord with huge property portfolios. The idea of someone who's actually living off the kind of the rent paid by hundreds of people, tens or hundreds of people, to make that essentially unprofitable. So that involves obviously huge tax disincentives for landlords, and particularly landlords with multiple properties. It involves a huge council house building program to rejuvenate that form of housing, I suppose, so that there isn't the sort of share of the market in terms of private housing. So I think this is a very radical agenda that is being put forward by the Greens. We don't want to see an economy in which housing is primarily treated as a kind of economic asset for people to enrich themselves, as opposed to being seen as sort of like a necessary amenity for everybody. And we shouldn't be putting young families and single mothers and young workers or whatever, young men and women graduating or whatever, or apprentices in positions where that 30-40% of their earnings are going straight on their housing costs. So yes, it's about affordable, high quality homes that are also built in a sustainable way. This is a big program of investment that is needed, and to sort of totally reorientate our housing market away from the private renter towards really good quality social housing.
Just looking up whilst you were talking, the average rent in London is now over £2,700 per month. And if you're just renting a room, it is about £1,000 per month.
No one thinks this is sustainable. No one thinks this is sustainable, and it's like you can't have this sort of like, well, this is the orthodoxy, this is how the economy works. Well, it's immiserating people, and for not just for a couple of years while they sort of get a deposit together, because they can't get a deposit together, so they're stuck in the private rented sector forever. So like you're breaking the social contract if you're putting people in that kind of position on a massive scale. So it's got to change, and that has to have radical solutions.
Fantastic. I'm going to leave it there because you need to go at 8 o'clock, don't you? So
What was the last question? I don't mind doing one more. Question.
Well, it's a bit of a biggie, so I don't know.
Oh,
I'll put it on the
what
screen.
is it? Go on. I suppose I can do it in 1 minute.
So what do you think
Oh,
about
yeah, no, I
Zara
can do
Sultana's
that.
comments on NATO?
Yeah. I mean, I found it odd, because I think I understand why Zara felt like she needed to do that, to sort of have this distinctive position. But like, you're in a situation where the Green, your party doesn't have policies yet. So Zara Sultana is saying stuff like, we're sort of working class orientated party. We're going to have this stance on NATO. And you think, well, hang on a second. Like, the whole point of your party is supposed to be this democratic. So I don't see that it's particularly like comprehensible, actually, to start talking about these dividing lines. But also, I just fundamentally, I just don't think that policy positions on NATO are going to determine the future of UK politics. So we shouldn't be. I don't know. Like to me, the kind of the economic bread and butter issues are what are going to determine kind of how people's allegiances form in politics. So I don't. Not that I don't think NATO membership is an important issue, but I just don't think it's a central dividing line between the parties.
Fantastic. So I'd just like to finish by thanking Joe for coming on stream. If you liked this video, then you've got several things you can do. You could join the Green Party. You could like the video, and you could subscribe to the channel, or you could even become a channel member. But for now, goodbye and best wishes.